On today's show, we are going to analyze the 2024 quarterback landscape for fantasy football home league drafts. I repeat, home league drafts. We're going to start with a more general discussion on the quarterback position this season. We'll hit on one quarterback specific strategy, and then we'll get into two quarterback league strategy, targets, outlooks, and more. I thought last year, kind of the meta around quarterbacks for single quarterback leagues was be in on a league quarterback, right? We saw Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen all go in the first 2, maybe 3 rounds in home leagues. Lamar Jackson also went high. Now, Josh Allen, Hurts, and Lamar all had really strong seasons, but I don't think they separated enough from the pack to pay off the tag. You know, guys like Dak and Love, Cousins, Purdy, Stroud all went way later and weren't that far off of those guys. And Mahomes actually failed pretty miserably. So just looking back, JJ, did you think it was a mistake for people to be in on elite quarterback the level they were last season, taking them in round 2 and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, 2022, when you look back, and we even talked about it a little bit last year, I remember on the show, like if you look back at 2022, it was just an outlier season for those top quarterbacks. Not only did they perform really, really well, but also the guys who did really, really well were the guys that we were drafting early. But then on top of that, like if you look at like mid QB1s into the low QB1 range from 2022, they all sucked too. So it was like this perfect storm, sort of like what we're seeing with like tight end in the reverse this year, right? Where they just sucked last year. And so now people are kind of down on them. We see this market fluctuation, from year to year a lot, right? And then things generally just normalize and they get back to how things should be. I would say, though, this year, based on what happened in 2023, I do think that this year, the way people are drafting is along the lines of how they should be drafting. Because when you get to, in your 12-team league, when you get to like round 3, round 4, that's when things really start to flatten. And that's when the opportunity cost becomes not as great. And it's okay enough to then take on one of those quarterbacks. The biggest issue last year was that you were taking on that cost in the second round where you were getting some really, really good running backs and wide receivers. Whereas, it's a little bit flatter now, especially this year, even if you look at it from just like a single season lens, like you get a little bit more flatness there. So it's a lot easier to take on those elite quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Evan, in your latest top 150, you have Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes all clumped very close together and closer to the 3-4 turn or early 4th round, whereas last year, a lot of these guys were going round 2. And I kind of think that that's right. My gut is that it's right because there's a lot more options here. We have some rushing quarterbacks we can talk about later that have some upside as well, which I like as well. But yeah, Evan, what do you think about the top of quarterback and overall quarterback strategy for drafts this year?
I think there's a fairly clear-cut first tier, and then there's after that a tier where it's guys that could potentially jump into that first tier, beginning with Anthony Richardson. But to me, that first tier is fairly clear-cut. You got Josh Allen, who's been the quarterback 1, quarterback 2, quarterback 1, and quarterback 1 over the past 4 seasons. Jalen Hurts, the tush push is not going away. Extreme weaponry. I think that the offense will be better called under Kellen Moore than it was under Brian Johnson. Lamar Jackson, that insane rushing capability, obviously. Todd Monken offense. Zay Flowers should be better. Mark Andrews will be healthy. Patrick Mahomes, way better receiver core. I think there's a clear-cut first tier. And then, after that, it's in the second tier, it's guys that could potentially jump into the first tier.
So the issue is, JJ, that we have early ADP, very early home league ADP, but we're seeing right now Josh Allen at 20th overall, Jalen Hurts at 31st overall, Patrick Mahomes 32, and Lamar Jackson 36. Certainly Allen at 20, I think is probably going to be a pass for all of us. But JJ, what do you think about the likes of Hurts, Lamar, and Mahomes kind of in that, round 3, early round 4 type range?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where they should be going. And that's really where in this landscape, in this quarterback environment where what's changed over the years, what's changed basically since 2019 when Lamar Jackson did what he did, is that we're seeing this combination of good mobility from the top quarterbacks and also the really, really good passing numbers on top of that, right? So what people kind of get wrong, I think, with the mobile stuff is that it's more of a floor thing than a ceiling thing. For a quarterback to really hit a ceiling, they still need to have good passing numbers, right? Like a floor thing would be like Kyler Murray last year, where he was fine because he was still scoring over 5 points per game with his legs, but he had a 3.7% touchdown rate. So the ceiling, you know, wasn't there necessarily. Now, if he were to have stronger passing numbers, then obviously he'd be a really, really great fantasy asset. And I'm sure we'll talk plenty about Kyler later on. But, you know, I think what's changed is the fact that we have this predictability aspect where we know who these quarterbacks are going to be. I'd say if you asked this question to me back in the heyday of late round quarterbacking, I would say that round 3, round 4 is way too early still, because the correlation between preseason expectation and postseason result was basically non-existent for those quarterbacks back then. Now we at least know that those quarterbacks are more than likely going to be good. And maybe people don't feel as strongly about like Mahomes because of what he did last year. Fine, just throw him out. You can still look at Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and feel really, really good about what they're going to produce and what they're going to give you. And that's the key reason. Like the delta between the top quarterbacks and a replacement level quarterback really hasn't changed through the years. Basically over the last 15 years, it'll fluctuate year over year, but it's not going to be a dramatic shift. And what's really changed is the predictability aspect. And that's why, going with a Hurts at the 3-4 turn. Yeah. And like you said, with Josh Allen going where he's going, I don't think there should be that gap between him to those other guys. To me, it just doesn't make that much sense.
Yeah. Evan has Allen and Hurts back to back in his rankings. And actually from a projection standpoint, our projections actually have Hurts ahead of Allen. I want to talk specifically about Allen here for a second, JJ. Evan, I think is more in on the Bills as a team than I am this year. I am concerned certainly with their weaponry. Now, obviously, if Josh Allen goes and rips off 15, 20 rushing touchdowns, it's not going to matter. But where you at on the Josh Allen versus Jalen Hurts debate, given the current state of weaponry for the Bills?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I think that the default is to say, I'm going to draft Josh Allen before Jalen Hurts. Like, it's just the natural, even if projections say, because my projections really like Hurts too. Even if it says one thing, you're like, okay, look at the consistency. The dude's been a top 2 quarterback for like 5 straight years. This is crazy, right? The thing that I'll say though is that Allen has a lot of rushing touchdown regression coming. Last year, if you just look at expected rushing touchdowns versus actual, he's like 5 or 6 touchdowns above that mark. Now, whenever we look at something like that, we can't just assume that all of those touchdowns will just disappear and not go to Josh Allen, because he could then throw for those touchdowns if they score the same amount of touchdowns year over year. I do have some fear though. Joe Brady down the stretch, they were a really run heavy team. The final 6 games of the season last year, if you count what they did in the playoffs too, the final 6 games of the season, they were below expectation in terms of dropbacks over expected. And they were just a run heavy team with Joe Brady under center. And while that might help Josh Allen to some degree on the ground, we want passing offenses and heavy passing offenses because it's going to be more efficient. There's going to be more scoring opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think between Allen and Hurts, the more I've sort of like chewed on it, the more I've started to lean Hurts more and more. Because I think the difference really comes down to with Hurts is whether or not you think the tush push is going to go away. Yeah. And if you do, then take Josh Allen. But if you think that it's still going to be there, I think there's a lot of upside with Hurts, just given the Kellen Moore change.
I think we do not think that the tush push is going to go away. Ross Tucker is like Eagles sideline reporter, and he texted me. I was like, "Yo, do you think the tush push is going to go away?" And he said, "Absolutely not." He was at like an offensive line convention, and he had just spoken with an Eagles starter. Yeah. So I think we have a pretty high level of confidence that the tush push is not going away.
Yeah. If the tush push does go away, I'll be making a personal visit to Ross Tucker's home to punish him for that take. But no, I think that's mostly the default. They could do it maybe slightly less, I think. But, still, it's going to be a big factor. And I agree, the Allen Hurts stuff is super close. One point that I do want to make is that if you are in a 10-team or smaller league, I would be prioritizing quarterback as much as I can. So one of these guys, Allen, Hurts, Jackson, Mahomes, in a 10-team league, I'm going out of my way to get these guys because there's not that many of these guys to go around. And in a 10-team league, everyone's running back and wide receiver is going to be pretty loaded. I think mine will be as well. So just wanted to put that out there.
My defense of my Josh Allen take, and I mean, I have them really close. All right, I have Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen very close, right next to each other in terms of positional ranking. I think that Josh Allen is a better player. He had 15 rushing touchdowns last year. And I don't think he's going to score 15 rushing touchdowns again this year. But he's also had seasons where he had 8, 9, 8. The year before this past year, he had 7. Right. Ben Gretsch mentioned on ETE that he has Josh Allen projected for double. I think he has him projected for 10. And I kind of, I don't think that the losses of Stephon Diggs, especially the way that Stephon Diggs played in the second half last year, and Gabe Davis, who's really just a guy, I don't think they're that big. I think Dalton Kincaid can have a monster second season. I really like Keon Coleman. I know that the reports, at least during OTAs and minicamp, were a little up and down. I think Khalil Shakir, it might be really, really underrated. And Josh Allen, I think, is a player that is capable at this point of elevating teammates. That I'm like betting big that the Bills, there's like this national narrative that the Bills are in this like semi rebuild.
Yeah.
And when I did their team preview, I like disagree with that completely. I think they're a top 5 team in the NFL.
So if you think the Bills are going to win 11, 12, 13 games, it will be Josh Allen Supermaning. I'm confident in that, right? And if you think that they're going to win 11, 12, 13 games, I think Josh Allen will finish as the quarterback one. I'm just a little bit more skeptical than Evan. I do want to talk about Mahomes here for a second as we talk about this elite tier, because I think it's interesting. The ADOT has gotten so low. Average depth of target just keeps going down, 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 down. They addressed that by getting Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy. And latest, like, I don't know what's going on with this Rashee Rice suspension. They could end up having him all year at this point. I honestly have no idea what's going on with the Rashee Rice suspension stuff. So, JJ, do you think this is a turnaround for Mahomes? My only caveat on this is I think it will, but the market is on it. Mahomes' ADP in home league right now is 32. That's 4 spots clear of Lamar Jackson. I personally prefer Lamar Jackson to Patrick Mahomes. Market has it slightly the other way. But yeah, JJ, how do you see a potential Mahomes turnaround? Again, in fantasy, he was flat bad last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like, fortunately for him, I guess, and unfortunately for us, there's the name recognition. So like home leagues and such, they're still going to draft him pretty early, despite what he did last year. But I mean, I think the bottom line is the Chiefs offense last year scored 37 offensive touchdowns. In every other year, so let me just read you the 5 years during the Mahomes era. They scored 66, 46, 53, 53, and 59. I mean, they're going to score 10 to 15 more touchdowns this year than they did last year. That alone can completely flip how Patrick Mahomes looks as a fantasy asset. I agree with you, though, like from a rankings perspective and where I draft them, I'm going to lean into the rushing just a little bit more. Obviously, Mahomes has that in his arsenal to some degree. But really, like the beauty of Mahomes and the reason why he can be and he can match those guys that have mobility and good passing numbers is because they're so pass heavy close to the goal line and at the goal line and in the red zone. And so I expect a huge bounce back from him this year. Like you said, the Rashee Rice stuff, the fact that he might not get suspended this year, like that's definitely on the table at this point, I think is huge, because if you look at what these wide receivers bring to the table, they all play a pretty a complementary role to one another. And I think that's just huge from an offensive standpoint and to be able to score a lot of points. So to me, Mahomes is firmly right there. I'd still be taking Hurts, Lamar, and Allen over him. But I'm not going to hate on anyone, especially, obviously we're talking about home leagues and stuff, but in like a best ball environment, if you're trying to stack or if you just like that build a little bit more, I'm not going to fault you for that.
On top of the Chiefs making huge additions in the receiver core, just from a statistical standpoint, Patrick Mahomes, his career touchdown rate is 6.1. Last year it was 4.5, the lowest of his career by a fairly significant margin. I know, JJ, you've done a great job of pointing out that regression to the mean in regards to touchdown rate at quarterback positions is maybe one of the best stats that we can lean on. And he's got a lot of positive regression forthcoming, it looks like.
I mentioned small leagues, JJ. We haven't talked as much about large leagues. Sometimes people hit me up and they're like, Adam, I'm in a 14-team league. I'm in a 16-team league. What should my strategy be? My initial thought is that, man, it's going to get real thin at running back and wide receiver real fast. And so I want to prioritize that more than quarterback. But JJ, how do you think about quarterback in relation to 14 and 16 team leagues?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of two categories to this whenever I answer it. It's league size, like we're saying, it's either you're in an 8-team league or a 16-team league. That changes the dynamic, but also just your general competition, right? Like we've all played in leagues that are weaker and don't have fantasy managers that play a whole lot. And in those environments, even if it is a 14 or 16 team league, I might be okay with going and taking on the cost of getting a Mahomes or something, because people are going to be unpredictable during the draft. And the other thing too, to keep in mind in those drafts, if you're in a more casual league, they will draft the Matthew Staffords of the world who should largely go in a home league, like undrafted. They'll take them like 5 rounds higher than their ADP, which actually helps your Mahomes pick or any early round quarterback pick because there's less of a gap between them to a replacement level player. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I mean, like I think overall, like people do get this wrong often. They think, oh, I'm in an 8-team league, I don't need to get a quarterback early, or I'm in a 16-team league, I'm going to get the advantage at quarterback. But the problem in doing that is your league is starting even more running backs and wide receivers than they otherwise would. So I agree with you. You know, in those leagues in general, I'm not going elite quarterback, but if I know that it's a weak competition type league, then I'll lean into it a little bit.
All right. I want to get to some quarterbacks who I think can threaten for the top tier. And to me, the way you need to threaten for the top tier these days is what JJ said. Combine elite rushing, or at least strong rushing, with a really strong passing season as well. Like, I am not worried that Joe Burrow or Dak Prescott or Brock Purdy or Jordan Love or something like that is going to finish number 1 overall at quarterback this season. I don't think that's in the range of outcomes because of the way they play. However, Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, Jayden Daniels, at least I think have ceiling outcomes where they could at least threaten that. I want to start with you, Evan, on Anthony Richardson. His ADP, which shocked me, ADP in home league setting right now is 49 overall. And I can't believe that because there was such bad like vibes from people around Anthony Richardson heading into last year. Of course, he only played 173 snaps last season, like 2.5, 3 games worth. And he went off for 74.6 DraftKings points. Now, a lot of people are scared of the injury. Reminds me a lot of the Christian McCaffrey somewhere said, you can't take Christian McCaffrey, he's going to get hurt. Everybody's, you can't take Anthony Richardson, he's going to get hurt. I want to take Anthony Richardson. I don't want him at 49 overall. Let me check, Evan, where you have him real quick here in the rankings. Evan has him at 57 overall, which makes me feel a bit more comfortable there. But yeah, Evan, what's your take on Anthony Richardson threatening the top tier this year?
I mean, I think that he is the top candidate to do that among the second tier quarterbacks. Did you say he's at 49 in home leagues? That's his
Correct.
ADP?
Correct.
Wow. Yeah, that's well, I'll tell you what, Field Yates, who, I mean, he works for ESPN, he holds a decent amount of sway, you know, and he's a really good analyst. We've had him on the show. Love Field Yates. He had him as I think his number 1 quarterback this year. So I wonder if that's influencing the home league ADP. That's really surprising to me. Barely played as a rookie, you know, you got the injury risk. I mean, I love Anthony Richardson. I think having him at 57 overall and QB5 and, you know, atop the second tier is pretty darn aggressive. I mean, I can build a really, really good case for him that I think the Colts are going to have. They're going to have an enhanced throw rate. They went out, they used a second round pick on AD Mitchell. They signed Michael Pittman to a big deal. Josh Downs, I think, can give them a lot more than he did. He played hurt a lot last year. They've got a really good offensive line. Shane Steichen, I think, is one of the best young play callers in the NFL. Like, you have Cam Newton upside with Anthony Richardson. That ADP surprises me, though. I really thought I'd be like above ADP on him.
Yeah, and it might come down. This is very, very early home league ADP. The one thing I'd say, JJ, is that if you extrapolate out Anthony Richardson's stats off this tiny sample, I mean, he smashes. Like, he would have been like the number 1 quarterback this year. But the tape bros, JJ, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the tape bros. The tape bros say that Anthony Richardson can't complete a pass. He's just still one of the worst throwers of the football in the NFL. So where do you come down on the Anthony Richardson stuff?
Yeah, I'm around where Evan's at with him. You know, I think that if there's a quarterback in this tier that's going to make the jump, it would be him. But I do think that even like the stat bros who throw out what he did last year and get all hyped up about it and excited about it, you know, he scored 21 and 30 points per game, or points in the 2 games where he actually threw the ball, you know, a decent amount. But the thing about that is that the offense itself scored 2 and 3 touchdowns in those 2 games. And Anthony Richardson was part of every single one of those touchdowns, right? Mm-hmm. Like he's not going to have that big of a touchdown share in the offense. Obviously it's going to be greater than a lot of other quarterbacks just because of what he can do with his legs. But keep in mind, you know, like Jonathan Taylor's there now and healthy. They could lean on him a little bit more at the goal line. Like I definitely understand the upside case for Anthony Richardson. Obviously, you know, we've written and talked about the mobility factor so frequently over the last 5 to 10 years of doing this stuff. But I do worry a little bit about inflating that small sample size and what that really means just based on like how he was accumulating points. So I get both sides, which is why I think I just kind of come down, you know, where I too expected the market to be, but apparently the market's even higher than that.
I also think that, you know, we should keep in mind that Shane Steichen, you know, he came from the Eagles where they did the the tush push. Ryan Kelly is still one of the best centers in the league when healthy. And I mean, they could do. We only got a 2.5 game full, the equivalent of 2.5 full games sample from Anthony Richardson last year. I mean, they could easily do install the tush push in Indy.
Yeah. If you're worried about injury stuff, always better in home leagues. And I don't play scared like that. But if you are worried about Anthony Richardson getting hurt, if he gets hurt in a home league, you'll be able to drop him and find somebody reasonable to play off the wire. You'll be able to put him in your IR spot. Obviously, in best ball, you can't do that. All right, let's go to my favorite personal later round quarterback for this year. It is Kyler Murray. Now, his ADP is at 68-ish in home leagues right now, which is a little bit higher than he's going in best ball. But man, I just love the setup for Kyler this year. 13 dome games or good weather games. One of the NFL's worst defenses. You add Marvin Harrison, full year of Trey McBride. Kyler has a 133 carry, 819 yard, 11 touchdown rushing season under his belt back in 2020. Now, he wasn't able to move as well, and he talked about that, especially laterally off the ACL last year. Says he's fully back now, 2 years off the ACL. So, I don't know, JJ. This is my most owned quarterback in best ball so far is Kyler Murray. I think maybe he can't get to the top because I don't think he has that rushing outcome that he showed in 2020 as a likely range. But man, he can at least threaten the top on a week-to-week basis with arm plus legs, in my opinion. And we could see a ton of shootouts. So I hope I'm not getting out over my skis here. A lot of my best ball stuff is tied to Kyler. JJ, what do you think about him as a later round target in a one quarterback home league? Would you be okay, I guess, with Kyler as your QB1?
Yeah, I think that he's the perfect quarterback pick this year because it's kind of, you're getting him towards the bottom of that tier if you want to group him with like the Stroud and maybe even Anthony Richardson as like the upside plays, what have you. But you can get him at the bottom of that tier, so you're extracting value that way. Kind of playing the ADP game a little bit, you're just getting more value out of him. But right now, like I love to look at historical ADP expectations. So it's just charting where players have been drafted overall historically by position, and then showing how many points per game they actually scored, and just finding trend lines and saying this is how many points we'd expect this guy to score at this ADP, right? So Kyler at his ADP right now would be expected to score about 18.4 points per game. Well, last year, coming off a knee with horrible weapons, new coaching staff, he scored 18.3 points per game, right? He scored 5.3 points per game with his legs, and he scored 4.9 or more with his legs in all 5 NFL seasons. 4 of those were over the 5 mark. I bring that up because since 2011, we've had 35 quarterbacks hit 300 pass attempts. That's just a marker to say, hey, they started for most of the season. Hit 300 pass attempts in a season while running to a 5 point per game mark with their legs, like through rushing, right? Of those 35, every single one of them scored 17.7 or more points per game. 31 of them hit 18 points per game, and 20 of them hit 20 points per game. So Kyler Murray has gotten to that 5 point per game mark with rushing, via rushing, basically every single year of his career. And guys who do that are consistently getting to 18, 19, 20 points per game. And where he's being drafted right now, that 18 to 19 mark is basically expectation. So I think you can make a very easy argument, given the weapons that they added. This is another year within the system and with this coaching staff. You can make a very easy argument that Kyler's been drafted around his floor throughout this offseason.
I love it. I also wanted to give a shout out to the great and underrated Cliff Kingsbury, under whom Kyler Murray finished as the number 3 overall fantasy quarterback in the year of our Lord 2020. But yeah, I mean, just, that year removed from the injury is so important. And Drew Petzing, I think, is a play caller to bet on. Only had him for 8 games last year. Marvin Harrison is a massive addition, above what they had last year. I mean, a little Marquise Brown, a lot of Trey McBride. But then you're talking about guys like Rondale Moore, who might not even be the number 3 receiver in Atlanta this season. Michael Wilson as a rookie. Michael Wilson should be better. But that's the cast of characters that he was throwing to last year. Yeah. And he was pretty good in fantasy. He wasn't crushing it.
Right.
But I mean, he was pretty bankable down the stretch.
The point that I want to make here that I think we'd all agree with is that I don't want to reach for pocket passer. So Joe Burrow has an ADP of 59. Dak Prescott, 68. Jordan Love, 72. Brock Purdy, 91. To me, Kyler is clearly the play among those guys. Don't want to be reaching for pocket passer whatsoever. All right. The last guy kind of in this range who I think can threaten is Jayden Daniels. Now, Jayden Daniels' ADP is around 109. He's going to come way cheaper than a lot of these guys. It's hard to know exactly how much Jayden Daniels is going to run and how effective he's going to run at the NFL level. What I will say, and what I thought was interesting from the ETE pods on the NFC East, was that Jayden Daniels' scramble rate in college, not his designed run rate, but his scramble rate in college was far higher than Anthony Richardson's. So in other words, he holds the ball more, tries to make something happen, and just takes off, right? And that is obviously very exciting. Jayden Daniels' build also looks like Lamar Jackson. I don't like to base things just on the way they look, but they have like very similar, especially after Lamar lost the weight, they have very similar weight and height. So JJ, how are you going about thinking through Jayden Daniels' upside as a rusher this season and then overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people should ground themselves at least a little bit with Jayden Daniels, because I've been on Jayden Daniels all off season. I think that he's a fine pick, all of that, especially in home leagues where I think he'll go even later than what we're seeing in like the best ball streets and stuff. But I think that we do need to ground ourselves that rookie quarterbacks generally do not give us very good fantasy production, even when they give us the rushing production. It goes back to what I said earlier. The rushing production gives you a floor, but not necessarily a ceiling. So if you look at Jayden Daniels right now at that ADP, the ADP expectation would be in the 17s somewhere points per game, right? Like low 17s, right? The good news is that if you look at all quarterbacks since 2011, rookie quarterbacks who threw the ball 300 or more times and had 75 or more rush attempts, we only have two of them. It was Josh Allen and Kyler Murray. Both of them scored 17.8 and 17.3 points per game. So I do think that from a floor perspective, like we're drafting him around ish where his floor probably is, if we expect him to be as mobile or relatively mobile as what we expect or what we saw in college, right? So I think the question really just becomes, what's he going to look like as a passer? And the answer to that is probably not great, because we've seen a lot of rookie quarterbacks not thrive as passers historically. So I don't know if the upside is going to be as immense as some of the real truthers out there who are like, yeah, he's going to, do I think that he has top 3 quarterback upside? I guess it's hypothetically it could go that direction if the rushing really, really converts. But I'm just trying to ground it a little bit and say there's a big difference between a Jayden Daniels and even a Kyler Murray, because Kyler, we know, has the passing upside. We've seen it. We see the improved weapons. Again, another year in that coaching with that system. Jayden Daniels, we just don't know. It's fine to throw the dart because ambiguity that uncertainty often drives a lot of value, right? So it's fine to throw the dart. I'm going to have plenty of Jayden Daniels. I'm just trying to be realistic about, the outcome here and why this is one of the main differences and reasons why I think Daniels is drafted where he's drafted, and Kyler goes decent, a few rounds ahead of him, and Anthony Richardson goes a little bit ahead of him too. I know that Anthony Richardson, we have a small sample size of, but he's also now had 2 off seasons. Like he's been in the NFL system for a long time. And I also think that we would all trust the environment, the coaching staff, et cetera, in Indianapolis a little bit more than what we're trusting in Washington. So, I like Jayden Daniels. I've been drafting a lot of Jayden Daniels, but I do think that we need to just ground ourselves just a little bit with what the upside is with Daniels.
Evan would not agree with your statement about the coaching staff. He is a Cliff Kingsbury lover, and he's a lover. But anyways,
become a bit, by the way. I don't actually think that Cliff Kingsbury is going to, revolutionize the NFL or anything like that.
He's fine.
I just think he's kind of developed a bad rap.
Yeah.
Over the years. Patrick Mahomes, I understand that, he didn't have a winning record in college, and Cliff Kingsbury was a coach there, but they didn't have anything besides Patrick Mahomes. The Cardinals were really good on offense, at least for that 1 year under Cliff Kingsbury, and then last year he ends up at USC, and people blame him for Caleb Williams having the worst year of his college career. So that was a talent issue around Caleb Williams at USC. But look, there's a talent issue around Jayden Daniels in Washington right now. The offensive line, we've talked about maybe Seattle having the worst offensive line in the league. Tennessee probably not having the worst offensive line in the league anymore. Washington might have the worst offensive line.
Thorne,
and that's an
Thorne
issue
has them 32nd, yeah.
And that's an issue for a quarterback that likes to hold on to the ball, as we saw in Chicago with Justin Fields, And that was one of the pre-draft comparisons. Nate Tice, formerly of The Athletic, now of Yahoo, he wasn't high on Jayden Daniels because he saw so much of Justin Fields in him.
Yeah. Evan is at 104 overall on Jayden Daniels. So pretty much right in line with the market there for sure. I'll be watching. I hope Jayden Daniels gets to play in the preseason because I really want to see Jayden Daniels play in the preseason and get a good look there. All right. Pocket passer strategy. Now, I basically just dumped them off, JJ. I basically was just like, I don't want these guys. But there are some cases where I think you can take a Joe Burrow, a Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, something like that. It's not my ideal way to play, but I can see people making the case for it. Do any of those pocket passer types interest you? And then I do want to get to CJ Stroud as part of the elite tier as a pocket passer too. But yeah, any of the pocket passer types, Burrow, Dak, Love, Purdy, anything like that interest you, JJ?
Yeah, look, I can see the upside case for each guy. You know, Burrow, once he got right last year, he was pretty strong. He was averaging over 21 points per game. They were throwing the ball a ton. We know that the weapons are there. And he still played like 1 to 2 points below expectation per game last season, partially because of how he started that season. And then like Dak, I feel like everyone's expecting like some sort of regression from Dak, but he actually played below expectation last year too, given how they performed like sort of in the red zone and such. They just needed to air when they realized they needed to air it out. Everything changed for them. He had a decent touchdown rate, but he's had a good touchdown rate for the last 3 years. I think that those two guys in particular, you know, I think they'll meet expectation and be fine, but I don't know if we're going to see, you know, the league breaking outcome for either guy there. One guy who I think is kind of intriguing is Jordan Love. And the main reason for this is how that season might start for Green Bay. I did an episode of my podcast earlier this week on early season schedule analysis. And I just took PFF and Sharp Football's secondary rankings and I made an aggregate just to see where they had everything. And I wanted to just compare and see which teams had good schedules and not. Green Bay's first 9 games right before their bye, none of their opponents rank higher than 14th in that aggregate ranking of secondaries. They start the year against bottom secondaries and against the Eagles and the Colts. And both of those games could be high scoring, you know, shootouts as well. So I you know, the weapons are there for Jordan Love. We saw what he did towards the end of the year. I could see a scenario where if for whatever reason, you know, of these pocket passers, like he falls or slips a little bit in your home league draft, that would be one that I go after because I like to play by matchup if I'm not getting one of those mobile guys. Yeah. So I think Love is kind of attractive from like a managed season long perspective because of how things could start for that Packers offense.
I love that nugget, especially for a quarterback that really didn't play that well in the first, 7 or 8 games, and then just went on an absolute torrid pace in the second half of last season. Like he could get off to a fast start this year and potentially put together an entire. I mean, I think that he's in the mix for MVP. He was out there doing that too, with Christian Watson being banged up constantly, Romeo Doubs in his second year, Jaden Reed as a rookie, and Dontavian Wicks as a rookie, and both of his tight ends as a rookie in offensive line that wasn't that great in pass protection. So I love that nugget. I mean, Jordan Love, I think, is a great pick this year. And as we talked about on the Sleepers podcast a little bit, the Packers are an awesome offense to stack this season. Nobody's particularly expensive in that offense.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think like to JJ's point, as we start to get back towards the back here in the Dak, Love, Burrow type ranges, I'm going to be wanting to play matchups, right? Like some of those matchups JJ talked about, I'd be excited to play. Jordan Love in, and some other ones I might not. So those are some cases I think in one quarterback leagues where I'd be willing to take 2 quarterbacks if the bench spot is deep enough. In most one quarterback leagues, I only take 1 quarterback. But if I get to the back here, I think it's okay. And I have a deeper bench spots. I think it's okay to have 2 decent ones like Jordan Love and Jayden Daniels. That would be an exciting room for me to like mix and match quarterbacks with on a weekly basis in a 1 quarterback league. Before we move to 2 quarterback strategy, I do want to talk about CJ Stroud because I talked about this. There's an article up on the site right now, things I think about the 2024 season. And one of the things I think is that CJ Stroud might lead the NFL in passing yards and still not be a great fantasy pick. And people are like, how is that possible? How could he lead the league in passing yards and still not be a great fantasy pick? CJ Stroud is going extremely high, 45th overall in home leagues for a pocket passer, right? I mean, he's going to need insane volume and insane efficiency. We're talking about one of those like Mahomes-esque 5,000 yard seasons to pay off this ADP. I mean, we just can't get there on projection on CJ Stroud versus market, period. Now, I don't want to be too buried in the spreadsheets here because, again, the football guy in me is like, this team can throw more on first down. They can have more 3 wide receiver sets. Their overall throw rate can be higher. This is CJ Stroud's second year in the NFL. This dude's going to go ballistic. But the spreadsheet bro in me is like, we can't get here at 45 overall ADP. So, JJ, what do you think about CJ Stroud this season?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of research on like higher end QB1s, so top 6 quarterbacks who are pocket passers, right? We don't see it as frequently anymore, obviously, but we have it this year with CJ Stroud. And what I found is they obviously don't hit at as good of a rate as the mobile guys do, but there's a lot of like, there's some crazy data in it too, where like I found that high-end QB2s who are mobile, so maybe you could throw a Jayden Daniels in there depending on, where his ADP actually finishes this year. They've hit at a higher rate in terms of upside than immobile top 6 quarterbacks have since 2014. So over the last 10 years. And then the other thing that I kind of threw out there this year in my draft guide, and this sort of game theory related idea, is instead of going after a CJ Stroud, a pocket passer where we know passing numbers are a lot more volatile than rushing numbers are, where we know that, that's part of the predictability thing that I talked about earlier. We're going to see a lot of variability with passing numbers. And that's why back in 2013, 2014, 2015, the late round quarterback strategy was so effective because we didn't have nearly as many mobile quarterbacks doing like what they're doing today. And so you would draft, a Tom Brady third, in the second or third round, and his touchdown rate just didn't come to fruition. And then he was a bad pick. Right. Yeah. And it happened very, very frequently. And so what I sort of approached or how I approach this is, if you're in a larger league that has, a lot of bench spots, maybe like a high stakes league or something where, the waiver wire is going to be pretty thin and most people are just hoarding players, going with 2 high-end QB2 pocket passers instead of going after a CJ Stroud, mathematically over the last 10 years has yielded better results than just getting that one quarterback. And what I mean by that is I'm not even saying play it by matchup. I'm saying mathematically the odds of one of those 2 quarterbacks hitting better than CJ Stroud is actually there. It's in your favor. So that could be a Goff and a Tua or something like that, or a Stafford even and a Goff, or, those kinds of pocket passers, because there is so much variability, to these pocket passers numbers. So at the end of the day, I think Stroud's a fade. I have him way, way lower than 45th overall. I do think that, like, if you were to look at all quarterbacks in the league and say which one's going to lead the league in touchdown passes, yeah, he's going to be up there as one of the favorites, right? And leading the league in passing yards and such. But I mean, even look at like Tua last year. Like, Tua had a ton of yardage and it just didn't necessarily convert, especially down the stretch, because you need everything to really align and you need those touchdowns to be there too. And we can't just bank on this. It's not easily bankable.
Yeah, Evan has.
I have MVP bets on CJ Stroud from way back. Like maybe even before the Super Bowl or a little bit after.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'll definitely acknowledge that the lack of rushing acumen is there. He did have 3 rushing touchdowns last year, which, take or leave. He only ran like 2 times a game. And you look at his college rushing production, he had 1 career rushing touchdown and like very little rushing production at Ohio State. One note on him though, he had only a 4.6% touchdown rate last year, which I think there's a lot of room for growth there. Like, I think he could get up above 6. And I definitely think that they're going to throw the ball more after acquiring Stephon Diggs. They know better what they have in Tank Dell. Nico Collins emerged as, a true alpha. They extended Dalton Schultz. They're getting their entire offensive line back after that group didn't play a single snap together with the starting 5 last season. So I think there's all the reason in the world to expect them to increase their throw rate. CJ Stroud to potentially get up and, have a spike in terms of his touchdown rate. But there's no question that his upside is fairly significantly limited by his lack of rushing acumen.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be crazy if he wins MVP and is still a bad play in fantasy at 45th overall, but it's definitely possible. Evan has CJ Stroud ranked 69th overall right now in his top 150. All right, let's move to some 2 quarterback league thoughts here, JJ. Now, maybe you can explain to the people how you think about 2 quarterback leagues generally and how you would apply that to this season. We do have 2 quarterback rankings up on the site right now, and obviously there's a little bit more art than I think science with a lot of this stuff, knowing your league, knowing when quarterbacks are going to go, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you feel, or how do you think about 2 quarterback league strategy generally?
Yeah, look, I think that when you're looking at a quarterback rankings list, or looking at ADP, I should say, and you compare it to a rankings list, I think it's a pretty efficient market, like overall. Like people are doing a pretty good job, of ranking these guys. I know that we have our favorites and stuff, and we can say stay away from a guy like Stroud, but at the end of the day, I think that we would look at it and say this is probably the one position where we're going to probably agree most with how ADP has things, right? And because there's an efficient market, my approach this year especially would be to probably get an anchor at quarterback, right? Get one of the higher end guys, even if it's like a Kyler, right? Just get a guy that can be pretty stable in that QB1 spot. But instead of reaching for a pocket passer in that QB2 spot and that super flex spot, I would platoon and do sort of what I talked about with the two-headed monster approach with like a mid-range QB2 pocket passer types, and just platoon and it could even be a Goff at QB2 and then some really late round dart throw like a Derek Carr or something at QB3, and then just see if things align from a touchdown rate standpoint with those other guys to then match what you would be getting from a Purdy or from some of these lower end QB1s that are pocket passers. So I think that the other thing too is that you just look at the landscape and you look at how drafts are probably going to go down. A guy like Kyler might get drafted around the time where that drop off occurs at running back and wide receiver, where like we don't feel as confident anymore, about those players, and that just makes it an easier selection, going after that guy. But I think there's an argument to be made that you can get, any of the top 6 or 7 guys, Stroud aside probably, but get one of those guys, as that anchor, and then kind of play QB2 and put it up in the air and just play by matchup a little bit.
So we currently have Stroud, Burrow, Kyler, and Dak ahead of AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Jahmyr Gibbs in 2 quarterback leagues. And one of the reasons that we have it like that is because of the flatness of round 2 and round 3. Anybody who's been playing best ball, I think you understand that like having the 2.02 is not that great because the 2.11 projects almost similarly, right? And so to me, I am totally fine going quarterback here and being more aggressive at quarterback early in 2 quarterback leagues just because of how flat it is. Now, I also like JJ's idea of going with quarterbacks, two pocket passers late. And we'll get to some of those guys in a second here. But just generally, yeah, I think given how flat round 2, 3 is in redraft this year means I'm more likely to take quarterback over guys like Drake London, Jahmyr Gibbs, etc. Now, I think general question that people ask all the time is like, should I take 2 quarterbacks in a 2 quarterback league, or should I take 3 quarterbacks? The scenario JJ just outlined with a hero quarterback type thing, I think you need 3. Obviously, if you take, say, I don't know, Lamar Jackson with your first pick, and then you come back and you get Jayden Daniels with your second pick, that might be enough for me to stop at 2. But yeah, JJ, what do you think about scenarios where you take 2 quarterbacks versus 3 quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to like how we would all approach best ball, right? It just like how many of each position you get depends on how much capital you're spending on those positions earlier on, right? And so if you're getting a Lamar and a Jayden Daniels, Jayden Daniels is a QB1, low end QB1, high end QB2-ish. It makes sense to just stop right there. But the other thing that I would say, and then obviously, go with a 3 quarterback approach if you go with what I said earlier with like a hero quarterback or an anchor quarterback. The other thing I would say is if you're in a league that is active, that does trade. I know there's a lot of redraft leagues that absolutely don't. So, obviously this doesn't apply to that. But if you are in a league that's really active and that will have some trading, I don't mind, playing bully a little bit and getting a scarce asset to then take advantage of people later on in the year, whenever inevitable injuries happen, whenever, because it's not like best ball where you don't have the ability to go to the waiver wire and sort of fix your team if you have deficiencies by, building up your quarterback room and being semi-irrational by doing that just to own your league mates and, the other 11 people in your league. You have the waiver wire that can help out and help your team. And so I'm also okay with, if that it's an active league, I'm fine with going with 3 quarterbacks. If that third quarterback, like, don't get crazy and get like 3 QB1s. I'm not saying that, but if you want to get like a Kirk Cousins as your QB3 after going Lamar and Jayden Daniels, especially if one of them drops and that you can take advantage of your league mates later in the season, I think that's okay too. But I think it's a 2 quarterback approach if you're getting 2 pretty solid ones, then go with a 3 quarterback approach, just based on the amount of capital that you're spending.
Yeah, Evan, I think there are some guys later where you don't even have to go Kirk Cousins. Like if I want to tack on a 3rd quarterback, there's some guys that I like that people probably like less than Kirk Cousins. You know, like we talked on the Sleeper show, Deshaun Watson is one. I'm watching his shoulder, but Deshaun Watson is one that I kind of like for the rushing and the skill sets around him. Will Levis, I think the Titans are going to be extremely throw heavy this year. I wrote in the article that I thought Titans could threaten for the league lead in neutral situation pass rate. Drake May has a rushing profile, and he goes super, super late. Sean Payton, who I trust, saw something in Bo Nix to take him 12th overall. That's not, I don't think, like the worst one to tack on at the end. Evan's final quarterback in his top 150 is Jared Goff at 145 overall. He has one at 140 who I kind of like too in Justin Herbert. So, Evan, what do you think about Herbert and Goff in 2 quarterback leagues? I don't think they're great for 1 quarterback league options, but for 2 quarterback, Herbert and Goff, I think probably end up going too late.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with Herbert, it's almost a bet on individual talent because we know that this might be one of the run heaviest offenses in the league, and the weapons are lacking. Also, Justin Herbert can run too, which is something that Jared Goff does not do. I'm glad you brought up Deshaun Watson. He's a really interesting case this year. I mean, you can build a bull case and you can build a fairly confident bear case as well on him. Geno Smith, I wanted to bring up because, I mean, he's got DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is poised for a second-year leap. The offensive line is scary, new coordinator. But, I mean, this dude is willing to sling it, and he's got weapons. So I would add him in as an upside QB2/3.
Yeah. These quarterbacks that are in murky situations right now, and there are a bunch of them this year, I think is important for 2 quarterback leagues. And I would be taking shots here. I already said that I want to take a shot on Drake May. I think Drake May will be starting. I know that New England media has Jacoby Brissett starting all year. That would just shock me. Yeah. I think Drake May is going to play this year. And so given his rushing ability, I think he's a target. There are other ones though here, JJ. When do you think JJ McCarthy will start, and you're interested at all in him or Darnold? And then we also have the Las Vegas situation. We have the Giants situation, and I'll save the Pittsburgh situation. For the guys that don't know, JJ is a towel-waving Steelers boomer, and I do want to get his take on the Russell Wilson versus Justin Fields stuff. But yeah, let's start with the Minnesota one. JJ, in 2 quarterback league, do you have any interest in Darnold or JJ McCarthy?
I mean, yes, depending on cost, of course, but like JJ McCarthy, I think that when you look at these situations where there's a rookie, we know that if and when those rookies play, they're likely not going to go back to the veteran, right? And so if they make the switch to Drake May, JJ McCarthy, I mean, maybe these guys start even earlier, like week 1 with JJ McCarthy's getting a lot of hype right now. But regardless of that, you want these guys for the right time in your season, which is the fantasy playoffs, down the stretch, all that good stuff. And so those rookies would hypothetically be there at that time. That's also when injuries might pile up and maybe you need that QB2. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a league where, there isn't that much action in terms of trading and stuff, that's the kind of league format where I would just stash those guys and then hope that they, start sooner rather than later. And then you can take advantage of them, later in the season whenever they're actually posting some numbers. I'm not really that interested in the veterans as much because, like I said, I think typically we get the rookie stuff. Typically the rookie stuff is always inflated. Like they're going to start, week 15 and they always start like week 4. Right. And so I'm going to lean into that a little bit and say, I'll get them at a discount right now. And I know that there's no reason to really invest heavily in a Sam Darnold or something unless I'm unless I really screwed myself earlier on in the draft and need that early season production because I want my players to be giving me production when it matters most and when bye weeks are happening. So I'm going with like a JJ McCarthy. I'll go with like even an Aiden O'Connell. Like I even if like Gardner Minshew starts the season, it feels like if there's one guy that would finish the season, it would be the younger player who they need to get more reps and they need to see more out of, right? Sure. I think there's a good chance that O'Connell just starts the entire year, right?
Yes.
And then Drake May, it's the same deal. And then Pittsburgh's just a totally different beast at this point.
Yeah, hold on. I do want to get to the Pittsburgh stuff in a second here. But yeah, the point that I wanted to make on the 2 quarterback stuff is if this guys get named, like they might get named a week before. But if you do your 2 quarterback draft, before it gets named, I mean, you're going to get a huge discount there. So let's say Drake May gets named the week 1 starter or, AOC gets named the week 1 starter. You're getting a huge discount if your draft is before that. So I think it's worth taking shots on those guys for sure. Evan, I know you're on Darnold a little bit more than JJ is. I kind of more agree with JJ that McCarthy will be playing by the end. We'll see how well Darnold can play here. But yeah, Evan is also more on, I think, anti-Daniel Jones train. And we've talked about his contract and everything like that. But yeah, Evan, any interest for you on Drake May, Minnesota stuff? I know you're on Las Vegas, Giants stuff, and 2 quarterback.
Yeah, I think that Drew Lock has like a pretty good chance to be the starter down the stretch for the Giants. I mean, doesn't give me great vibes between Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones. There have already been reports that Daniel Jones has been bad in training camp. I mean, I think we know, but at this point, that he's not very good.
Yeah,
and so they might roll out Drew Lock. I mean, just for like locker room stuff. Like if Daniel Jones is shitting all over the place, like they're going to have to make a move there. And I think the Giants are going to be bad. The Giants they're not equipped to be very good. They might have the worst secondary in the league. The offensive line is a huge issue. Yeah, I mean, I like Drew Lock to be a starter late in the season.
All right. Before we get out of here, maybe perhaps the biggest discrepancy between real life and fantasy football to me is Justin Fields, because I think we can all agree Justin Fields is not there as an NFL quarterback. In fantasy, though, when he starts, he will project for us as a top 6 option. Like there's no way he won't each week. So the question becomes, what scenarios can we take Justin Fields? Do we think Justin Fields has a chance to start? And actually, I wouldn't even bring this up. I thought Russ Wilson was like a lock to start week 1, but even Adam Schefter gave some credence to the rumors that Justin Fields is still in the mix to start week 1. Now, I don't see it like that, but a lot of people think Justin Fields is going to make a lot of starts this year. I go to the Pittsburgh homer. Yes, I've spotted him waving a yellow towel in the stands before, screaming for his hometown Pittsburgh Steelers.
In his Mason Rudolph jersey.
In his Mason Rudolph jersey.
Yeah. He's standing next to Mark Cabali. Yeah.
Right?
Asking for more Najee Harris runs straight up the middle. JJ, what do you think is going to happen with Russ Wilson versus Justin Fields?
I've been in the camp all offseason that it's going to be Russ, and I think that it's going to be Russ throughout the entire season. Now, I do think that this injury that his calf that he's been dealing with, this minor injury, I think that did force, obviously it forced Fields to find the field in camp, and then you get this Schefter report. And the Schefter report, honestly, is the first time that's made me feel like I could be very wrong, with this take. And it's obviously like a feel-based take because we're not in the coaching room or anything. So my thing though is, number one, I actually think that Russ fits pretty well in an Arthur Smith offense, first and foremost, right? Like this is a play action heavy, get the ball down the field, run heavy, run centric offense, not unlike what we saw him thrive in Seattle early on in his career. And it's probably what he kind of needs at this point in his career, right? And so I think that the fit makes a lot of sense with Arthur Smith. On top of that, this is more of the Feely take side of things, but Pittsburgh's a very, very, to a fault, loyal organization. And I do believe that based on all the reporting and based on what Tomlin said in pressers, they told Russell Wilson that he's going to be the starter. And this is not an organization that just like switches things immediately. I mean, look at how long the leash that they gave even like a Kenny Pickett, right? Like, I mean, it's an org that, to a fault, and it's annoyingly frustrating. Not even from a fandom perspective, because I'm not nearly the kind of fan that I was when I was 18 years old. But it's very, very frustrating when there's a more optimal way to do things and they just stick with their loyalty, right? And so that's my fear with Justin Fields, is that they're gonna do what they've said. And Mike Tomlin's a pretty straight shooter with how he, unless he's just like making really weird statements and saying really weird things at press conferences, which he often does, and phrases things really weird. When he says things directly, I believe him. Like they're not like a we'll mess around kind of org. And so I think because of that, and because of the fit with Russ from a football perspective, I do expect Russ to be the starter. Now, if things go south, sure, like obviously anything can change, but I'm also part of in the camp that I think Russ was a little bit undervalued as a player even last year. And so that's I'm bullish enough for him to just maintain that job and be able to keep it. But obviously from a fantasy perspective, if he loses it and Justin Fields starts, like you said, Adam, I mean, the dude's a top 8, top 6 guy week in and week out if he's starting.
if I'm in a 2-quarterback league and I have a deep bench and I want to hold Fields because he could absolutely wreck. I mean, if he gets in there.
Yeah.
Evan, any thoughts on the Russ Wilson versus Justin Fields stuff?
My take has been very similar to JJ's. It's just, I also think that Justin Fields could be an unbelievable fit in an Arthur Smith offense. You just go balls to the wall, run heavy. You're running. I mean, you can run the triple option if you wanted to. You could run the wishbone with Justin Fields, and he gives you so much more dynamic ability as a runner than Russ does at this stage of his career. But in general, my take has been almost lockstep with JJ throughout the process.
All right. Breaking news into the show from Adam Schefter. Chargers announced Justin Herbert was diagnosed with an injury to the plantar fascia in his right foot. Per the team, doctors have recommended approximately 2 weeks in a boot, followed by graduated return to play protocol, with the expectation that he will be ready for the start of the regular season. So just wanted to mention that because we did talk about Justin Herbert here. I still think Justin Herbert's going a little bit too late. This is going to sink his ADP even further.
I mean, we were just talking about how, he has rushing ability, to kind of to compensate for some of the passing volume that he's going to lose. I mean, this hurts. I think this really hurts. I'm going to probably drop him out of the 150 altogether.
That's also a lingering injury. If you have that foot, the plantar fascia, like that sucks. I mean, do you guys remember back in the day when, like, I think Roddy White had it for like years, like it just wouldn't go away, and I think Julio even dealt with it too. Yeah. But like that's not a fun injury to deal with.
For sure. All right. Hopefully this gave you guys a really good look at the quarterback landscape for this fantasy football season. Can't recommend JJ's podcast enough. I know we've talked about it on here before, but if you guys like our podcast, I'm sure you'll like JJ's podcast as well. JJ, tell the people where they can find you on social or anywhere else you want to be found.
Yeah, social. Go to Twitter at LateRoundQB, and then all my stuff you can find over on LateRound.com.
LateRound.com. You can find Evan and I. And honestly, I know people have differing feelings on Twitter. I know I say this just to remind everyone every year. No matter what your feelings are about Twitter or whatever, the best, fastest, most actionable information in fantasy is on Twitter. So, I mean, you just have to be there. At Evan Silva, at Adam Levitan, at Establish the Run, and be sure following JJ as well. For Evan, for JJ, for producer Luke, for producer Ryan, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.